On the Texas frontier, danger waits in the most ordinary places. A single moment will test courage, shift loyalties, and force an enemy to choose between hatred and humanity. What happens next will change everything. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The year was 1858, and the Texas frontier was a place where two worlds collided with fierce intensity. Sarah Miller, a 22-year-old settler with auburn hair and determined green eyes, had been captured during a Comanche raid on her family's homestead 3 months earlier. The attack had been swift and merciless, leaving her parents dead and their small cabin burned to ashes. Now she found herself living among those she had been taught to fear, a reluctant member of Chief Tall Bear's band. Sarah sat outside her hide tent, working on a pair of moccasins as instructed by Nuna, the elderly woman who had been tasked with teaching her the ways of the people. Her fingers were raw from the unaccustomed work, but she refused to complain. Survival meant adaptation, at least until she could find a way to escape. "You pull the sinew too tight," Nuna commented, her weathered face creasing with disapproval. "The leather will bunch and hurt the foot." Sarah nodded and loosened her stitching, grateful for the older woman's patience despite the language barrier that still existed between them. After 3 months, Sarah had learned enough Comanche words to manage basic communication, but nuance escaped her. Across the camp, a group of children played near the edge of a wide, slow-moving river that served as the band's water source. Among them was Comanche, the 7-year-old son of Chief Tall Bear. The boy had taken a curious interest in Sarah, often watching her from a distance with the same wary fascination with which she regarded his people. "The chief's son watches you again," Nuna said, her dark eyes following Sarah's gaze. "He thinks you are strange, with your pale skin that burns in the sun." "I think he is simply curious," Sarah replied, setting down her work. "Children are the same everywhere." A commotion suddenly erupted near the riverbank. One moment the children were laughing and splashing in the shallows. The next there were shouts of alarm. Sarah stood to get a better view, and her heart froze when she saw what had happened. Comanche had ventured too far into the river, where the current was stronger than it appeared. His small head bobbed in the water as he struggled against the pull, his panicked cries carrying across the camp. The adults nearby rushed toward the water, but they were still too far away. Without thinking, Sarah ran toward the river, shedding her deerskin dress as she moved. She had grown up near a creek in Tennessee before her family moved west, and swimming was as natural to her as walking. "The white woman runs to the water," someone shouted in Comanche. As Sarah plunged into the river, she could hear the surprised exclamations behind her. The Comanche were not known as swimmers. They crossed rivers on horseback or with makeshift rafts. The current was stronger than she had anticipated, and the water was cold despite the summer heat, but Sarah pushed forward with powerful strokes. Comanche was struggling less now, his strength ebbing as the river carried him downstream. Sarah's lungs burned as she swam harder, finally reaching the boy just as he slipped beneath the surface. She grabbed his arm and pulled him up, wrapping her arm across his chest as she had been taught by her father. "I have you," she gasped in broken Comanche. "Be still." The boy coughed and sputtered but stopped thrashing, allowing Sarah to begin the difficult journey back to shore. The current fought against them, but Sarah angled her body, using the flow to guide them toward a bend in the river where the water slowed. By the time they reached the shallows, several warriors had ridden downstream and were waiting. Chief Tall Bear himself waded into the water, his face a mask of contained emotion as he took his son from Sarah's arms. The boy coughed up river water, but was breathing steadily. Sarah stood shivering in the waist-deep water, suddenly aware of her state of undress and the dozens of eyes upon her. She expected anger or suspicion. Perhaps they would think she had pushed the boy in. But instead there was a heavy silence as the Comanche tried to make sense of what they had just witnessed. Chief Tall Bear handed his son to a waiting woman, then turned to Sarah. His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she held his gaze. "You saved my son," he finally said in his own language, words Sarah had learned well enough to understand. "Any person would do the same," she replied, struggling with the pronunciation. The chief shook his head slowly. "Not any person. Not any white person." He gestured to one of the women, who approached with a blanket and wrapped it around Sarah's shoulders. Today, you are not enemy. Today, you have Comanche heart. As they walked back to the camp, Sarah felt the curious glances of the people shift from suspicion to something new, something that might, with time, resemble respect. And though she still dreamed of escape, of returning to her own kind, something had changed within her as well. These people, whom she had been raised to fear as savages, had shown her more humanity in this moment than she had expected to find. That night, as the tribe celebrated Queenie's survival with singing and storytelling, Sarah was invited to sit closer to the central fire than she had been permitted before. The boy himself brought her a portion of meat and sat beside her, his dark eyes studying her with open curiosity now rather than distant wariness. "You swam like the fish," he said in halting English, surprising her with words from her language. "How?" Sarah smiled, touching her chest. "Where I was born, there was water. My father taught me when I was small, like you." The boy nodded solemnly, then touched his own chest. "I will learn." As stars appeared overhead and the drumming began, Sarah realized that in saving this child, she had crossed a river more significant than the one that had nearly claimed his life. What lay on the other shore, she could not yet say. 2 weeks had passed since the incident at the river, and Sarah found her position within the tribe subtly transformed. No longer kept under constant watch, she was allowed to move more freely around the camp, though always within sight of someone. The women had begun to include her in their daily tasks, teaching her to prepare food according to Comanche customs, and showing her how to identify useful plants in the surrounding plains. Today, Sarah worked alongside Nuna and several other women, scraping a deer hide stretched on a wooden frame. The monotonous labor gave her time to think about her changed circumstances. Escape still dominated her thoughts, but the urgency had diminished. Winter would come soon enough, and she knew that attempting to cross the vast plains alone before spring would be suicidal. "Your hands work better now," Nuna observed, inspecting Sarah's portion of the hide. "Soon you will not ruin good materials." Sarah recognized the gruff comment as high praise from the older woman. "I have a good teacher," she replied. Nearby, Queenie was watching the women work while practicing with a small bow his father had given him. Since his near drowning, the boy had attached himself to Sarah whenever possible, seemingly fascinated by her difference. In turn, she had begun teaching him more English words, a transaction that Chief Tallbear permitted with silent approval. "Sarah," Queenie called, abandoning his bow to approach her. "Look what I found." He proudly held out a small arrowhead, perfectly formed and clearly ancient. Sarah set down her scraping tool and examined the stone piece. "It's beautiful," she said, turning it over in her hand. "Very old, I think." "My father says it is from the old ones," the boy explained. "He says they watch over us still." He pushed the arrowhead back toward her. "It will protect you." Sarah hesitated, knowing such a gift had significance. "Are you sure?" Queenie nodded solemnly. "You saved me from the water spirits. Now I protect you." Sarah carefully tucked the arrowhead into a small pouch she kept at her waist, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Queenie." As the sun climbed higher, riders appeared on the horizon, returning from a hunting expedition led by Chief Tallbear. The entire camp stirred with anticipation, as successful hunts meant feast days and trading opportunities with other bands. However, as the riders drew closer, Sarah could tell something was wrong. They rode with urgency, and there was no game visible among them. Women began gathering children, and warriors moved to the perimeter of the camp. "What's happening?" Sarah asked Nuna, who was already packing away the scraping tools. "Trouble comes," the older woman replied tersely. "Go to your tent and stay quiet." Before Sarah could comply, Chief Tallbear rode directly to where the women worked. His face was set in grim lines as he dismounted. "Texas Rangers," he said, addressing the gathering crowd in Comanche. "A large party tracking our movements. They will be here by nightfall." Sarah's heart jumped at the mention of Rangers. White men, possibly searching for captives like her. This could be her chance to return to her own kind. Yet the thought brought less joy than she would have expected even a few weeks earlier. The chief's eyes found Sarah among the women. He spoke directly to her in his limited English. "They come with many guns. They not ask questions first." He studied her face. You won't go with them? The directness of the question caught Sarah off guard. Around her, the tribe was already beginning the practiced routine of breaking camp, women dismantling lodges while men gathered horses. This was a people accustomed to swift movement when danger threatened. They might kill all here, Chief Tallbear continued when she didn't immediately answer. Even you. Rangers see all Comanche as enemy, see all who live with Comanche as traitors. Sarah understood the implication. If the Rangers found her living among the Comanche, especially now speaking some of their language and dressed in their clothing, they might assume she had gone native, a fate considered worse than death by many settlers. What will you do? She asked. We move north, to join Wintermouth Band near Sacred Medicine Rocks. Safe place. He gestured at the bustling camp. You choose now. Stay or go. It was the choice she had dreamed of since her capture, presented in the least expected way. Freedom offered by the very man who had authorized the raid that had made her a captive. Queenai, she said suddenly. Where is he? A flicker of something, perhaps approval, crossed the chief's stoic features. My son helps with horses. Sarah looked around at the camp that had been her prison, and increasingly, her home. At Nuna, who watched the exchange with knowing eyes. At the women who had begun to treat her as one of their own. At the distant figure of Queenai, leading a pony to the gathering herd. I will stay, she said finally. They would not understand that I am not harmed here. Chief Tallbear nodded once, accepting her decision without surprise. We ride in 1 hour, be ready. He turned to go, then paused. Sarah Miller, you make hard choice. Sometimes hard choice is right choice. As he walked away, Nuna approached with a bundle of Sarah's few possessions already gathered. I knew you would stay, the older woman said. The spirits spoke this to me when you first came. Did they? Sarah asked, taking the bundle. Nuna shook her head with a small smile. No, but I saw how you look at the boy, at all our children. You have good heart, too good for those who would shoot first and talk after. An hour later, Sarah rode beside Nuna in a procession heading north, away from the advancing Rangers. Behind them, the camp had been dismantled so thoroughly that only the most experienced tracker would know people had been there at all. As they crested a rise, Sarah turned for one last look at the river where she had saved Queenai, where her life had taken an unexpected turn. Somewhere to the south were people who looked like her, spoke her language, shared her customs. Yet as the distance grew, Sarah realized that the ties that bound people together were more complex than shared blood or skin color. They were formed in moments of choice, of courage, of connection, and with each hoofbeat taking her farther from her old life, she felt those new ties strengthening. We will reach the winter grounds in 5 days, Nuna said, breaking into her thoughts. There you will meet more of the people. There you will learn to be truly Comanche. Sarah nodded, feeling both trepidation and a strange sense of anticipation. The path ahead was unknown, but for the first time since her capture, she was choosing it herself. The winter camp of the combined Comanche bands stretched across a sheltered valley, protected from harsh winds by towering rock formations that the people called the Standing Grandfathers. 3 months had passed since Sarah had made her choice to remain with Chief Tallbear's band, and the cold season had settled fully upon the plains. Snow dusted the ground as Sarah emerged from her lodge, wrapped in thick buffalo robes. Her face, once pale and prone to burning in the summer sun, had taken on a weathered quality from constant exposure to the elements. Her hands, once soft from a settler's life, were now calloused and strong from Comanche work. Sarah, come quickly! Queenai called, running toward her with excitement lighting his face. The storyteller has arrived. Sarah smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. During their journey to the winter grounds, she had continued teaching him English, and in return, his constant chatter had improved her Comanche significantly. Now they often spoke in a blend of both languages, creating a private connection that both valued. Is it old Grey Wolf? She asked, following the boy toward the central gathering area where a large fire burned. Yes, he brings news from all the bands and the best stories, Queenai replied. Father says he remembers the time before any white eyes came to our lands. Sarah had heard of the revered storyteller from Nuna and others. Grey Wolf was not only an elder whose memory stretched back decades, but also served as a messenger between scattered Comanche bands, carrying news and maintaining connections across vast distances. The camp had already gathered in a wide circle around the fire, with places of honor prepared for Chief Tall Bear and the visiting storyteller. Sarah hesitated at the edge of the gathering, still conscious of her outsider status despite months of integration. Quinai tugged at her hand, pulling her forward. "You sit with us," he insisted, leading her toward where his father was already seated. As they approached, Sarah noticed the old storyteller watching her with intense curiosity. Grey Wolf was ancient by frontier standards, his face deeply lined and his long hair completely white, yet his eyes remained sharp, missing nothing as he observed the white woman in Comanche dress being led by the chief's son. Chief Tall Bear nodded slightly as Sarah approached, indicating she should sit nearby but not directly in the family circle, an acknowledgement of her improved status without overstepping cultural boundaries. She settled onto a buffalo robe, Quinai sitting close beside her as was his habit. Grey Wolf began with formal greetings in Comanche, his voice surprisingly strong despite his advanced years. He acknowledged each band represented in the winter camp, recounting recent hunts, births, and notable events. Then his gaze fell once more on Sarah. "I see the people of Tall Bear have brought something unexpected to our winter fires," he said in Comanche, a white flower growing among prairie grass. The gathering grew quiet, all eyes turning toward Sarah. She felt heat rise to her face but kept her expression composed as Nuna had taught her. Chief Tall Bear spoke. "She saved my son from the river spirits when stronger warriors could not reach him. She chose to stay with us when rangers came hunting. She learns our ways with respect." Grey Wolf studied Sarah for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "The old stories tell us that sometimes Estacaneo, the Creator, places people in unexpected places for purposes we cannot see." He switched suddenly to perfect, if archaic, English. "What do they call you? Daughter of the white people?" Surprised to hear her native tongue spoken so fluently by the elder, Sarah answered, "My name is Sarah Miller." "Ah," Grey Wolf replied, still in English. "And before you lived among the people, what was your life?" "My family farmed near the Brazos River," Sarah replied. "Before that, we lived in Tennessee." Grey Wolf switched back to Comanche, translating her words for those who didn't understand English. "I too once lived among the whites," he explained. "When I was younger than this boy here, I was taken by traders who thought to make me Christian. I learned their tongue and their books before I escaped and returned to my people." This revelation rippled through the gathering. Grey Wolf's history was well known, but many of the younger members had never heard him speak of it directly. "Tonight," the storyteller continued, "I will tell two stories, one from the ancient days of the people, when the buffalo first gave themselves to us, and one from the days when the first white men came to our lands, bringing both wonders and sorrows." As darkness fell completely and the fire grew higher, Grey Wolf began the first tale, a creation story that Sarah had not yet heard. She listened intently, understanding most of the Comanche words now, occasionally leaning toward Quinai for whispered clarification of terms she didn't recognize. The storyteller wove images of a time when animals and humans spoke the same language, when the world was new, and the Comanche people first learned to live on the Great Plains. His hands moved expressively, his voice rising and falling with the drama of the narrative. Around Sarah, the people listened with rapt attention, even the smallest children sitting quietly, absorbed in the ancient tale. When the first story concluded, there was a pause for food and drink to be distributed. Quinai brought Sarah a wooden bowl of stew and sat beside her again. "Do you like the story?" he asked in English. "Very much," she replied. "We have stories too, but different." The boy nodded thoughtfully. "Father says all people have stories. That is how we know who we are." Sarah was struck by the wisdom in the child's words. "Your father is right. Perhaps someday I will tell you stories from my people." "I would like that," Quinai said seriously. "Then I will know you better." As the meal concluded, Grey Wolf began his second tale, the promised story of first contact between the Comanche and European settlers. This narrative was darker, filled with misunderstandings and conflicts, but also moments of cooperation and exchange. Throughout, the storyteller maintained a balanced perspective, neither demonizing the newcomers entirely, nor excusing the violence that had erupted on both sides. Sarah listened with growing discomfort, recognizing how limited her understanding had been of the complex history between her people and the Comanche. The story Grey Wolf told contradicted much of what she had been taught growing up, yet held an undeniable ring of truth. When the storytelling concluded, people began to disperse to their lodges, the children heavy-eyed with sleep despite their efforts to stay awake for the entire performance. As Sarah rose to leave, Grey Wolf gestured for her to approach. "Walk with an old man to his lodge," he said in English. "I would speak with you." Sarah glanced at Chief Tall Bear, who nodded his permission. She fell into step beside the elder as they moved slowly through the camp. "You have chosen a difficult path," Grey Wolf said once they were out of earshot of others. "Not fully of the people, yet no longer fully of your own kind." "I had no choice when I was first taken," Sarah replied. "But staying was my decision." "And why did you make this choice?" he asked, his eyes searching her face in the moonlight. Sarah considered her answer carefully. "At first, for survival. Then, because of Queen Eye and the others who showed me kindness. Now," she paused, "now I'm not sure I would fit in either world completely." Grey Wolf nodded, seeming satisfied with her honesty. "I lived 17 summers among the whites. When I returned to my people, many viewed me with suspicion. Was I still Comanche in my heart, or had I become something else?" He stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "The path between worlds is lonely, Sarah Miller, but those who walk it can sometimes build bridges where others see only chasms." "Is that why you learned English so well?" she asked. The old man smiled faintly. "I learned it to survive, as you learn Comanche. I kept it because I knew days would come when understanding between our peoples might mean the difference between peace and war." His expression grew somber. "Those days are upon us now. The whites push further into our hunting grounds each season. The buffalo grow fewer. The old ways are threatened." "What will happen?" Sarah asked, suddenly fearful of the future Grey Wolf seemed to foresee. "That is not for me to know," he replied. "But I will tell you this. The child you saved may one day be a leader of his people. What you teach him about your kind, both the good and the bad, may shape what is to come." He placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. "Teach him well, Sarah of Two Worlds." With that, Grey Wolf continued toward his assigned lodge, leaving Sarah standing alone under the winter stars, pondering his words and the unexpected role she had found herself playing in this clash of civilizations. Spring had returned to the plains, bringing with it new grass, wildflowers, and the birth of foals among the Comanche herds. The winter camp had disbanded as various bands departed to their traditional territories for the hunting season. Chief Tall Bear's people had journeyed back to the river where Sarah had saved Queen Eye nearly a year before. Sarah stood at the river's edge, watching the now 8-year-old boy demonstrate his swimming skills. Under her patient instruction throughout the winter months, Queen Eye had overcome his fear of deep water and learned to move confidently through the currents that had once nearly claimed his life. "Watch me, Sarah," he called, diving beneath the surface and reappearing several yards away. "I can swim like an otter now." "Very good," she called back in Comanche, smiling at his progress. "Remember to keep your movements smooth, not rushed." As Queen Eye continued practicing, Sarah became aware of a commotion in the camp behind her. She turned to see riders approaching, warriors returning from a scouting expedition earlier than expected. Their urgent pace suggested trouble. Sarah called Queen Eye from the water and hurried back to camp with the boy at her side. They arrived as Chief Tall Bear was receiving the scout's report. "Army soldiers," the lead scout was saying in Comanche. "Many, with wagons and big guns. They build a fort near Crooked Creek, 3 days' ride from here." Sarah felt a chill despite the warm spring air. Army presence meant increased conflict was likely, especially as summer hunting would take the tribe closer to the areas settlers coveted for farming and ranching. Chief Tall Bear noticed her arrival and gestured for her to join the council. Over the past months, he had increasingly sought her perspective on white settlers' ways and intentions, a role Grey Wolf had foreseen for her during his winter visit. "The soldiers bring many families to settle," the scout continued. "They clear land for farms where the best hunting grounds lie." The chief turned to Sarah. "Why do they come now in such numbers?" Sarah considered what she knew of government policies and settler patterns. "The war between the states has ended," she explained in Comanche. Many soldiers have no work now. The government gives them land here as payment. Land they believe is empty. Empty? One of the older warriors scoffed. Our people have hunted these plains since before their grandfathers were born. Sarah nodded. They do not see as you see. To them, land must have fences and buildings to be claimed. Chief Tallbear was silent for a long moment, weighing options that grew more limited with each passing season. Finally he spoke. We cannot fight the bluecoats and win. Too many come with too many guns. He looked at the assembled council members. But neither will we surrender our ways or allow ourselves to be penned like the whites' cattle. What will we do, father? Queen Eye asked, his young face serious beyond his years. The chief rested a hand on his son's shoulder. We will send a message. We will speak with these soldiers before blood is shed. Murmurs ran through the gathering. Direct negotiation with the army was dangerous, with many past attempts ending in treachery and violence. I will go, Sarah said suddenly, surprising herself as much as the others. I can speak to them in their language. They will listen to one of their own. Chief Tallbear studied her face. You would do this? After choosing to stay with us? Sarah took a deep breath. I chose your people, yes. But perhaps this is why I am here. To help both sides understand before more die needlessly. After lengthy discussion, a plan was formed. Sarah would ride to the new fort with a small party including Chief Tallbear and 2 warriors. They would bring gifts and seek to establish boundaries that might allow coexistence, at least temporarily. As preparations were made, Queen Eye found Sarah packing her few possessions. Are you leaving us? He asked, his voice small with worry. Sarah knelt to meet his eyes. No, little brother. I am going to speak to the soldiers. Then I will return. Promise, he insisted, holding out his small hand with the arrowhead he had given her months ago. Keep this safe and bring it back to me. Sarah took the arrowhead, wrapping her fingers around it. I promise. The journey to the fort took 3 days, during which Sarah felt her identity shifting once again. She had spent nearly a year living as Comanche, thinking in their language, seeing the world through their perspectives. Now she would need to step back into her former self, to speak convincingly to men who would view her companions as enemies. They made camp on a ridge overlooking the newly established Fort Davis on the evening of the 3rd day. Below them, lanterns glowed in the gathering dusk, illuminating the wooden palisade and the cluster of tents and crude structures within and around it. Wagons were circled nearby, housing families who had not yet built permanent dwellings. So many, Chief Tallbear observed quietly. More come each day like ants to spilled honey. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of what they attempted. We should approach in daylight under a truce flag. That night Sarah found sleep elusive. She sat by their small, hidden fire, rehearsing what she would say to the army officers, how she would explain her presence among the Comanche without being branded a turncoat. Chief Tallbear joined her, his face illuminated by the dying embers. You are troubled, he observed. I fear they will not listen, she admitted. Or worse, that they will take me from you by force, claiming I must be rescued whether I wish it or not. The chief was silent for a moment. The choice will always be yours, Sarah Miller. You saved my son when you could have let the river take him. You stayed when you could have gone with the Rangers. Whatever happens tomorrow, know that you have a place among the people for as long as you wish it. His words comforted her, and eventually Sarah slept. Morning brought clarity and courage. Sarah dressed in a combination of Comanche and settler clothing, a practical compromise that she hoped would symbolize her position as mediator. The small party descended toward the fort, a white cloth tied to a lance held by one of the warriors. They were spotted when still half a mile out. Soldiers scrambled to defensive positions, and for a tense moment, Sarah feared they might be fired upon despite the truce flag. But an officer emerged, ordering his men to hold their fire as the unusual party approached. Halt there, the officer called when they were within earshot. State your business. Sarah rode forward slightly ahead of the others. My name is Sarah Miller. I was captured by Comanche raiders a year ago, but now serve as interpreter for Chief Tallbear. We come in peace to discuss the new settlements. The officer, a captain by his insignia, stared at her in open astonishment. Miss Miller, there were reports of a woman taken near the Brazos last spring. We presumed you dead. As you can see, I am very much alive, Sarah replied steadily, and here of my own free will. What followed was a day of careful negotiations. The fort commander, Colonel James Barrett, was initially suspicious of Sarah's allegiances, but eventually accepted her role as translator. Chief Tall Bear presented his concerns with dignity: the encroachment on hunting grounds, the need for access to traditional water sources, the disruption of migration patterns. Sarah translated faithfully, adding cultural context where needed, helping each side understand the other's priorities and limitations. By afternoon, a tentative agreement had been reached, a boundary line that would remain uncrossed by settlers for 1 year, access rights to the river for the Comanche, and a monthly meeting to address any conflicts that arose. As they prepared to depart, Colonel Barrett approached Sarah privately. "Miss Miller, you should know that your uncle has been searching for you since the raid. He lives in Austin now. I am duty-bound to inform him of your survival." Sarah had not thought of her father's brother in many months. The connection to her past life felt distant, yet undeniably pulled at her heart. "Thank you for telling me, Colonel. Please let him know I am well." "You could return with the next supply wagon," Barrett suggested, studying her unusual appearance. "Your place is with your own kind, surely." Sarah looked across the fort yard to where Chief Tall Bear waited with his warriors. "My place, Colonel, is where I choose it to be. For now, that is with the people who have become my family." Barrett seemed about to argue, but instead nodded reluctantly. "The offer remains open, Miss Miller, should you change your mind." The return journey to the Comanche camp was made in thoughtful silence, each member of the party contemplating the uncertain future that lay ahead. Sarah knew the agreement they had reached was temporary at best, a brief pause in the inexorable westward expansion that threatened the Comanche way of life. As they approached the camp on the evening of the second day, Queeneye ran out to meet them, his face alight with relief when he spotted Sarah riding beside his father. "You came back," he exclaimed, reaching up to her as she dismounted. Sarah lifted him in a brief embrace. "I promised, didn't I?" She placed the arrowhead back in his small palm. "I kept it safe, as I said I would." That night, as the tribe gathered to hear the outcome of the negotiations, Sarah sat in the place that had become hers, not fully inside the inner circle, yet no longer at the margins. Chief Tall Bear recounted the agreement, explaining the boundaries and conditions to his people. When he finished, an elder asked, "How long before they break this promise as whites have broken others?" The chief glanced at Sarah before answering, "Perhaps this time will be different, with one who knows both worlds to help us speak to each other." Later, as the gathering dispersed, Queeneye found Sarah near her lodge. "Nuna says you could have stayed with your own people today," he said, his dark eyes serious. "Why did you come back to us?" Sarah considered how to explain the complex feelings of belonging and purpose she had found among the Comanche. "Long ago, when I first came here, I was a captive," she said carefully. "Now I stay because this is where I'm needed most." The boy nodded, seeming to understand. "Will you teach me more swimming tomorrow?" "Yes," Sarah promised, smiling at his simple acceptance. "And perhaps you can teach me to use that new bow your father gave you." As Queeneye ran off to join the other children, Sarah gazed up at the vast prairie sky, stars emerging in the deepening blue. Her path forward remained uncertain. The agreement with the army might buy time, but the collision of worlds